Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Natasha and I do book things here. Today's video is another Stephen King Sunday and one I'm super excited about because I actually get to talk about a book today. So I read Carrie and we're going to talk about it today. I do want to have some sort of structure when discussing Stephen King books about my history with said book, my experience if I've read it in the past, give you guys an overview and a spoiler-free review as well as my star rating for the book. And then I'm going to talk about facts, so that's going to have to do with facts about the book, fun Stephen King facts about the book, and basically his inspiration for writing whatever book I'm reviewing. That's going to just sort of move into more of a discussion where I will have spoilers because hi, I'm me. But I will put up a note in each video once we're sort of moving into the discussion part of it. So if you guys just kind of want to hear an overview of each book and not really go into too many spoilers, but also want to hear like fun facts about Stephen King and like why he wrote stuff, that will be the first part of the video. The second half of the video or whatever will be more of a discussion, spoiler-filled shitfest. So as I mentioned many times, I'm reading King in publication order, so we're going to start with Carrie, obviously. So Carrie was the first book that he published, definitely not the first book that he wrote. He wrote a lot more short stories and a couple of novels that weren't picked up by a publisher before Carrie. This is the first major published work, and this came out in 1974. This is obviously a 2007 edition. So growing up, my experience with Carrie is that I read it when I was about, I want to say 12 to 13, to be sort of like the average age that people first read Carrie, which I find to be really interesting. Reading a lot of reviews and stuff, a lot of people just started reading that book around that age. That sort of makes sense given the subject matter of this book. It follows the story of Carrie White, who is a teenager in high school, and she has telekinesis. She's also dealing with a lot of bullying, super crazy religious mother, and the book sort of just starts from there and talks about how Carrie's dealing with that. I feel like at this point in pop culture it's hard to find someone who knows nothing about Carrie, but if you guys want no spoilers at all, that's what the book is about. It's about Carrie who has telekinesis and is getting bullied and has a religious mom. That's the overview of Carrie. I love this book quite a bit when I was younger. I definitely, in hindsight, probably should have read it when I was a little bit older because there are some pretty graphic scenes in this, a lot of violence and that kind of thing, but I remember really liking it, and I remember thinking that it was a pretty great like revenge story. Reading it as an adult, it definitely still holds up. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars just because it wasn't quite a perfect novel for me. There's definitely some things that I kind of cringed at now, just the language and things that were used in 1974, I don't really appreciate. There's a few racial words and slang used in this that I went, yeah, like, you know, I acknowledge that it was written in a time period where that felt appropriate, but it definitely isn't to me now, and I want to like address that in 2018, that it just wasn't something that I felt was needed. But yeah, overall, love this book. If you've never read Carrie and you know nothing about her story, read it. Just read it. So I'm gonna put that down for a minute. We're gonna talk about some of the facts behind Carrie and why Stephen King wrote it. There's actually like articles and articles and articles of facts about this, which I find really interesting because it was his first published novel. There's just seems to be like that much more facts to find out about it. And move sort of further and further away from his like first released book, I feel like the facts that I find out about them might not be like as many, but I have like pages of facts about it. So when Stephen King wrote Carrie, he was 26 at the time, which I find so bizarre because I'm almost 29 and I'm just like, oh, okay. He's 26 at the time, married to his wife Tabitha, and he had a toddler and a newborn. And they were super broke, and he was working as a teacher. He did a bunch of like janitor work and stuff like that, and he was writing a lot of short stories. Him and his wife were both writers at the time. I think she continued to write later on as well. They were both like struggling writers as like sort of like a hobby side job kind of thing, and he wrote a lot of like smaller short stories for like magazines. But yeah, so he's writing a lot of short stories and things for magazines, bringing in like, you know, a couple $100 here and there. You know, keep in mind that this is like 1970s, so a couple $100 at the time was like, you know, a good chunk of money. Definitely for somebody who's, you know, struggling with like 2 small kids. I find it really interesting that at the time that he was writing Carrie, in like the early 70s, he actually didn't have his own typewriter. He was using Tabitha's, and they kind of joke about it after that, like that's the reason why he married her, was for her typewriter. He's like, it was definitely a factor. It was kind of just joke about it, you know, which I find like just really funny. funny because like here he is like writing what we know now as like such a classic horror book, yet like he didn't even have like his own typewriter to write it on, which I think is just like, I don't know, super interesting to me. But the idea for Carrie came to him in a daydream. King definitely wrote a lot of things based on dreams, based on sort of like trains of thought, which I find like just so interesting because I mean, isn't that really like where most ideas stem from? Just like random thoughts, like what if a book was about this and this and this? He'd read, I think it was like a Time magazine article about this family where they think that the girls had telekinesis. I've come to realize that like that article was actually talking about the family in the UK. I cannot think of their names, like I had it written down, I forget what it is, where they had like sort of like ghost and like paranormal activity and stuff, and that's actually what The Conjuring was based off of. So in that article it said that telekinesis would be most strong in like a teenage girl who's like, you know, dealing with hormones and puberty. So he kind of had like that idea floating on in his head, and he started it, and he started typing, and you know, he was even said that like we didn't have that much paper, so it's like I didn't even want to like waste paper and spend money wasting paper, and he wrote 3 pages single spaced of the beginning of this story, and he hated it because he felt like it wasn't going at like a fast enough pace. He didn't like Carrie as a character. He thought that like, okay, like this isn't going to fit the word count that the magazine wants, it's going to be too long, and so he like ripped it out of the typewriter, balled it up, and threw it in the garbage. And like that was that. He was just going to write something else. Found like most interesting was that his wife actually like dug the paper out of the garbage. He said, you know, wiped off like cigarette butts, like, you know, unfolded it, spread it out, and read it, and she's like, I want to know how this ends. He says, well, like, I don't know jack shit about writing from a teenage girl's perspective, and she's like, well, like, I can help you with that. That's what ended up happening. He ended up writing Carrie. He'd say that it was like one of the harder books for him to write. It took him 9 months to write it, which doesn't seem like a long amount of time, but keep in mind that like some of Stephen King's work, like he wrote like a 600-page book in 10 days. Like some of them like just came out of him like really easy, but Carrie wasn't one of them. It took him 9 months to write it, and they needed the money, and so he pitched it to publishers and was denied by 30 publishers. I remember talking about Hot Pterodactyl Boyfriend where like he was denied by like 18 or something, but yeah, but Carrie was rejected by 30 publishers. And then he kind of just like let it be, and they had it out like waiting for responses back and stuff. They were so broke at the time that they got rid of their telephone because they couldn't afford it, and so he knew that it was going to be something either like an emergency or something really important, to where Tabitha had to dress up the 2 toddlers, go to the neighbor's house, make a call to his work, where work then paged him from the classroom to come answer the phone call, which again, I just thought that was amazing. And so he got paged one day, and he like went and answered the phone, and it was a publisher that basically said like, we picked up your book, we're going to give you $2,500 for it. And that was quite a good chunk of money for them struggling at the time, and so they moved out of their like trailer basically and into an apartment with the 2 kids. He bought a Ford Pinto and bought a telephone. Then he sort of just sat back and was like, you know, in like a decent place financially for a little bit. He would get like half of the money that like the publisher made on the book, and so he was thinking, you know, like maybe it'll make $30,000, I'll get like $15,000 and whatever. And he gets a phone call and said, are you sitting down? He's like, well, and the book sold for $400,000, so he got $200,000 from this book. He said that he kind of just fell on the ground in the kitchen between the door frame and was just like, oh my god, what do I do? And Tabitha was gone with the kids, and he's like, I want to get her something, like, you know, like we have this money now, like I want to buy something special for her, but it was a Sunday and everything was closed, so he went to the drugstore and thought like, okay, what's a nice thing that I can buy her? So he bought her a hairdryer. I just think that's really funny, and it's such like a 26-year-old husband thing to do, like kind of panic and be like, here honey, here's a nice hairdryer. And then he did joke later that like he replaced her wedding ring with like a nice like Cartier wedding ring. I just think it's funny that like he went and bought a hairdryer. But yeah, so anyway, that's kind of the fun facts about how Carrie was published. So then the character Carrie was actually inspired by 2 girls that Stephen King grew up with. One of them was a really quiet girl with like epilepsy who was like made fun of and bullied a lot, and the other girl kind of of always wore the same clothes and was made fun of and stuff as well. Before he'd even started writing Carrie, both of those women that like she was inspired by had actually died. Neither of them lived to see 30 years old, which is like really sad. The one girl was a victim of suicide, and then the other one had a really bad seizure and died. So he said, you know, like it's quoted in the beginning of the book that he's like, I wish that like they could have been alive to see this, or their daughters would have read Carrie or something like that, because it's roughly inspired by the both of them. All of that stuff sort of mixed together. The telekinesis, the two girls that from high school and stuff sort of like made Carrie's character. Yeah, so that's kind of some facts about it. I'm now going to move into the discussion. You guys can click out of this video at this point if you guys don't want to hear any spoilers, what happens in this book. If you do and you don't really care, I don't mind spoilers personally, then you can stick around and watch, and I'm just going to kind of discuss how I feel about this. So I mentioned earlier, I feel like it's hard to exist in pop culture and not really know what Carrie is about. So for such a little book, this is only like 230 pages, it packs such a punch in like the variety of different themes that it talks about. It talks heavily, obviously, about bullying. Carrie is getting like bullied for years by these shitty fucking teenage girls that like I'm just like, really. Then it talks about sin and religion. Her mother is this like crazy religious nut who thinks that like everything that has to do with sexuality, womanhood, menstruation, sex, anything like that is a sin. She, you know, throws Carrie in a closet to pray. She nearly kills her when she's 3 years old because she like looked at a lady who was suntanning. Like, it's nuts. I think I kind of forgot from the first time that I read it just how nuts Carrie's mom actually is, and I think reading it as an adult you kind of just see that more. You're just like, whoa, like this woman is screwed up. Carrie's dealing with a lot of like guilt about sin. Another big theme in this is the bystander effect. The beginning scene of Carrie I think is like so iconic. She's in the showers with like all the other girls in high school. She's already an awkward teenager. She already is sort of like an outcast because of her religious upbringing and whatever. And she is older, like she's almost 18, and she gets her period, thinks that she's bleeding to death. Like, I mean, it's just, you laugh at it now because it's something that we're taught, but then she was never told like anything about menstruation. So it's like you can imagine the fear in this like poor girl like getting her period and like thinking that she's bleeding to death. The rest of the girls obviously make fun of her and throw tampons at her. It's like very classic scene if you've watched the movie or if you know anything about this book, you know. And it's just, I think just reading it, it just makes me sad. Like Carrie's character is just sad. There's all throughout the book, there's really only like 1 or 2 seconds in the whole book, or minutes, where Carrie's actually happy. You know, like she's struggling at school, she comes home and deals with like her mom, which is like, so she doesn't really have like anyone escape at all. And then she obviously has her powers and so she has these like telekinetic powers. She's realizing that they're getting stronger and stronger. She's able to control them. She uses that as her revenge, and she uses them to sort of like take a little bit of ownership over herself, to kind of put her mom in her place, and is like, no lady, like I'm going to actually do some of the things that I want to do, and scares her mother and puts her mother kind of like in her place. This is a book that's so weird because, you know, Carrie obviously commits crazy acts. Spoiler alert, the prom scene in this. The whole book is leading up to prom and she just takes revenge on not just the girls that made fun of her and the people that made fun of her, but like the whole town and her mom. And while it's like very violent and gruesome that she kills all these people, you're also like, fuck yeah, Carrie. It's like she deals with so much shit that you're rooting for her. That's why this book was like so important to me when I read it as a teenager, because I think everyone can relate to like wanting to have some sort of like murderous revenge on the shitty people who bullied you, you know? Upon reread though, one of the major things that I took from this was actually Sue's character. Sue is a character in this book that she's there amongst these girls that kind of like bully her. She participates as well, but she doesn't feel good about it. She feels like she wants to help Carrie, and you know, she feels like you know, like what is something I can do to help this girl? And it's a lot of what we now call like the bystander effect. It's like when you want to stop something but it's taking place in such like, you know, intensity that you feel like you can't stop it. But Sue's the only one in this book that really has some sort of like care for Carrie. So Sue is the one that actually gets her friends to invite Carrie to prom, and you know, they decide from there like what sort of happens at prom. Obviously there's the big scene where like she gets dumped in the pig's blood. I think it's really important to read the book to find out sort of how that progresses. I'll definitely talk about the movies in like my adaptation sort of things. The book does a better job at explaining why they did that and Sue's involvement in it all. Like Sue really had nothing to do with Carrie's like prom experience other than just getting her there. She thought that it would bring Carrie out of her shell and like maybe make some friends or two. Then obviously the other shitty fucking teenagers decide like, no, we're going to, you know, pour pig's blood on her and like make fun of her and laugh at her. And I just feel like reading this, it's like those kids deserved it. Like, you know, I think the biggest takeaway from Carrie is just to be nice to people, because you never know like what's going to happen. You know, even though Carrie has like supernatural powers and telekinesis and all this stuff, I feel like reading it in 2018, you kind of go, yeah, like you really should be nice to everybody, because yeah, not everyone has crazy superpowers, but like be nice to the kid that might shoot up a school. Be nice to a kid who might, you know, go kill themselves or hurt someone or stuff like that. Like I feel like that's sort of the real takeaway from Carrie. Just fucking be nice to people, because you never know what kind of shit they're going through. So yeah, that's definitely what I took from it. If you've made it this far in the video and you've sort of listened to some spoilers and some discussion parts about it, definitely if you haven't read the book, read it. If you've only watched the movies and you're intrigued about reading the book, definitely read it, because I feel like the book is just different from the movies but gives you a little bit more than what the movies were able to give you. Yeah, that's Carrie. It's just a sad story to me, because like she was happy for like 2 seconds and it's just, I don't know, it's just teenagers suck, I think is like the overall theme of Carrie. I don't know, there's a lot of themes. Carrie should have been happy for longer. Her mom sucks. Everyone sucks. But yeah, they deserve to be murdered. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below if you've read Carrie, if you're interested in reading Carrie, any sort of thoughts down below. So yeah, let me know if you like sort of the research that I did. I had a lot of fun like figuring out why King wrote this book and some like, you know, fun facts about it. And currently I am almost done The Shining. Then I am moving into Salem's Lot, which it should have been Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, but my copy of Salem's Lot haven't gotten here yet, so I'm kind of skipping one, going back a little bit. Then I will be reading a short story called Rage, and then I will be reading The Stand, which is this guy right here. This one's huge, so this is going to take me many a moons to finish. I'm trying to go mostly in publication order. If I read one of his newer releases, I'll throw that in there too, but for the most part, publication order. And yeah, I just love doing research. It gives me something to do. 28, almost 29. I've been out of school for a long time, so like getting to actually like go and like make notes for something fills me with joy. I do hope you guys liked this video, found it interesting, and yeah, I hope you guys are all doing great. So until my next video, I'll talk to all of you soon. Bye!